Hello, I am Thomas Hardy. I was born in the year 1840, when village life still moved to the rhythm of the seasons and folklore ruled the countryside. I died in 1928, in the age of aeroplanes, Einstein's relativity, and total war. In the span of one single lifetime, I witnessed what may be the most violent transformation in human history since the fall of Rome. And I wrote it all down, not as a historian writes, with the cold distance of facts and dates, but as a novelist writes, with blood and breath and the breaking of hearts. Today, I want to tell you what I saw. And more importantly, I want to tell you why it matters now, in your world of 2026, more than it ever did in mine. Let me begin with the world I was born into. Communities were physical and rooted. Life was cyclical. The harvest came and went. The seasons dictated everything. Everyone knew every face. Your neighbor was not a stranger behind a screen. Your neighbor was the man who helped you bring in the wheat, the woman who sang at your mother's funeral. Then came the transformation. The agricultural order that had sustained England for centuries collapsed under the weight of industrialization. The railways arrived, the factories called, and what happened? Neighbors became strangers. Communities that had existed for centuries were scattered, and people found themselves atoms in anonymous cities. I ask you to hold that image in your mind. Atoms, disconnected, floating, because that word describes your world today as much as it described mine. Now, let me tell you who I was before I became the writer you may know. My father was a stonemason and a fiddler. Those two things shaped everything. From the mason, I learned the physicality of labor, the patience of working with material that resists you, the understanding that everything built must eventually crumble. From the fiddler, I learned rhythm and melody, and the way a song can carry the memory of an entire village across generations. I was apprenticed to an architect named John Hicks, and I spent my early years restoring Gothic churches across Dorset. That work taught me something profound. It taught me structural precision. Every arch, every buttress, every flying support has a purpose. And when I turned to writing novels, I built them the same way, with the precision of an architect who knows that one misplaced stone can bring down a wall. But the deepest lesson was this. I moved from the certainty of those church walls to the skepticism of Darwin and Mill. I created a kingdom. I called it Wessex. Now, I did not invent that name. Wessex was the ancient Anglo-Saxon realm of southwest England, but I resurrected it. I gave it new life. Casterbridge was Dorchester. Mellstock was Stinsford. Christminster was Oxford. Shaston was Shaftesbury. Every heath and town in my fiction maps to reality. But here is what I need you to understand. In my novels, geography is not a backdrop. Geography is destiny. The landscape does not merely surround my characters. It shapes them, traps them, and ultimately judges them. I recorded the topography of Wessex with an architect's precision because I believed that the land itself was a character in every story I told. The hills did not care about human ambition. The rivers did not pause for human grief. And that indifference, that magnificent, terrifying indifference, was the truth I wanted to capture. My novels were museums. I do not say this lightly. I was making anthropological records of a world that was dying before my eyes. The customs, the folklore, the dialects, the harvest superstitions, the mummers' plays, the country dances, the way a village celebrated a wedding or mourned a death. All of this was vanishing. The railways were homogenizing England into one bland national culture. London was swallowing everything distinctive, everything local, everything that made a Dorset village different from a Lancashire mill town. I captured these details because I knew they would be gone within a generation. And I was right. Wessex, in this sense, was an archive of the past, a preservation in ink of what could not be preserved in life. Think of it this way. I was doing for Victorian England what your most urgent documentarians are doing for endangered languages and cultures today. The destroyer was already at the gate. I simply refused to let it erase everything without a record. Now let me explain the philosophy that governed all of my fiction. I believed, and I still believe, that human life is ruled by three forces: heredity, environment, and blind circumstance. You do not choose the family you are born into. You do not choose the landscape that shapes your childhood, and you do not choose the accidents, the coincidences, the random cruelties that determine whether you rise or fall. In my novels, the landscape is never mere scenery, it is an antagonist. Consider The Return of the Native. Egdon Heath is not a setting. It is a timeless, indifferent force. The heath predates humanity and will outlast it. My characters struggle against it, and they lose. Not because they are weak, but because the forces arrayed against them are immeasurably larger than any individual will. This is the central conflict of all my work: the organic rhythms of nature against the artificial constraints of society. Human desire against cosmic indifference. And if you think that conflict has disappeared in your age of artificial intelligence and algorithmic control, I assure you, it has only deepened. Let me tell you about Michael Henchard. He is perhaps my most devastating creation. The novel opens with a scene that should shock you. A young man, drunk at a country fair, sells his wife and infant daughter to a sailor. One impulsive act, one moment of rage and alcohol. And that single decision determines the rest of his life. Henchard rises to become the mayor of Casterbridge, a man of power and respectability. But his past is never truly buried. It returns, as the past always does, and it destroys him. The philosopher Novalis wrote that character is fate. I took that as my maxim. Henchard's downfall is not caused by some external villain. It is caused by what he is: physical, impulsive, proud, incapable of adapting. He represents the old agricultural world, the world of handshakes and brute strength, and his rival, Donald Farfrae, represents the new world, calculating, mechanized, efficient. Farfrae does not defeat Henchard through malice. He defeats him simply by being modern. And that, I submit to you, is the most terrifying kind of defeat there is. I gave Tess a subtitle that scandalized Victorian England. I called her a pure woman. Let me tell you why. Tess Durbeyfield is a young woman of extraordinary natural beauty and goodness. She is violated by a man named Alec d'Urberville. She loses her virginity not through her own choice, but through violation. And yet Victorian morality labeled her a fallen woman. The society I lived in declared that the crime committed against her body somehow diminished her worth as a human being. I refused to accept that judgment. I insisted on the title page itself that Tess was pure. The crime was committed against her, not by her. Her value as a human being was not diminished by what others did to her body. This was a radical statement in 1891, and I want you to consider how radical it still is today. In a world where victims are still blamed, where a woman's past is still weaponized against her, where the structures of judgment have merely moved from the church pulpit to the social media feed. There is an image in Tess that I want you to hold in mind. It is a steam-powered threshing machine. This monstrous device arrives in the fields of Wessex, belching smoke, and demanding an inhuman pace of labor. The workers must feed it. They must keep up with their rhythm, not their own. The machine does not care if you are tired. It does not matter if your hands are bleeding. It does not care if you have a name. This was my symbol for the ultimate industrial intrusion into the organic world. The steam thresher severs the bond between the worker and the earth. Before the machine, the laborer worked with the land, at the land's pace, in the land's rhythm. After the machine, the laborer works for the machine, at the machine's pace, and the land is merely raw material to be processed. I described this in 1891. You are living it now. The algorithm is your steam thresher. It does not belch smoke, but it demands the same inhuman pace. It does not matter if you are tired. It does not care if you have a name. My final novel was Jude the Obscure, and the reaction to it was so savage that I never wrote fiction again. The critics called it obscene. They burned copies of it. A bishop threw his copy into the fire. What had I done that was so unforgivable? I had told the truth about three institutions that Victorian society held sacred. First, the university. Jude Fawley is a stonemason of extraordinary intellectual gifts. He teaches himself Greek and Latin. He dreams of studying at Christminster, which is to say Oxford. But the gates are closed to him. Not because he lacks ability, but because he lacks class. The university exists to perpetuate privilege, not to nurture genius. Second, the church. It has failed to offer solace in a world that is crumbling. Its doctrines ring hollow against the reality of suffering. Third, marriage. I called it a sordid contract that binds incompatible people in permanent misery. For this, they destroyed me, but I had spoken the truth. And the truth was this: Victorian optimism was dead. The institutions that promised meaning and order had failed. Jude the Obscure was published in 1895. I tell you now, with the clarity that only distance provides, that this novel marks the birth of the 20th century in literature. The condition it describes is modern alienation. Jude is cut off from community, from God, from the woman he loves, from any institution that might give his life meaning. He dies alone reciting the Book of Job, while outside his window the crowds of Christminster celebrate a holiday without the slightest awareness of his existence. That image, a man dying alone while the world celebrates, is the defining image of modern life. The isolation I described in the 1890s is the direct ancestor of the psychological dislocation felt in 2026. You sit in your rooms, surrounded by more information and connectivity than any civilization in history has possessed, and yet you are more alone than Jude Fawley ever was. At least Jude knew what he had lost. Many of you do not even know what you are missing. After I abandoned fiction, I turned to poetry and to my great verse drama, The Dynasts. In that work, I introduced a concept that I believe is more relevant to your world than anything else I ever wrote. I called it the immanent will. The universe, I argued, is driven not by a loving God, but by a blind, unconscious force. The immanent will does not love or hate. It does not reward virtue or punish sin. It simply moves. It operates without consciousness, without empathy, without purpose that any human mind can discern. Now consider your algorithms. They optimize, they calculate, they sort and rank and recommend. They determine what you see, what you buy, what you believe, whom you love. And they do this without consciousness, without empathy, without any understanding of what they are doing to you. The immanent will, which I conceived in 1904, is the most precise metaphor I know for the algorithmic systems that now govern your lives. You move within them as my characters moved within fate, largely unaware, largely helpless, and entirely subject to forces that do not care whether you flourish or perish. They called me a pessimist. I rejected that label with every fiber of my being. I was not a pessimist. I was a meliorist. Let me explain what that means. A pessimist believes the world is bad and nothing can be done. An optimist believes the world is good and everything will work out. I believed neither. I believed the world is brutal, indifferent, and frequently cruel, and that the only way to make it better is to face that brutality with open eyes. If way to the better there be, it exacts a full look at the worst. That is my credo. You cannot build a better world on comfortable lies. You cannot improve the human condition by pretending that suffering does not exist, that injustice is an aberration, that technology will save you from your own nature. Meliorism demands courage. It demands that you look at the climate crisis, the algorithmic manipulation, the epidemic of loneliness, the collapse of shared meaning, and you refuse to look away. Only then, only after you have fully confronted the darkness, can you begin to find the path forward. After the destruction of Jude, I never wrote another novel, but I did not stop writing. In the 30 years between Jude and my death, I wrote over 900 poems. Many of them are among the finest in the English language, and the greatest of them were born from personal catastrophe. In 1912, my first wife, Emma, died. Our marriage had been deeply unhappy for years. We lived in the same house but barely spoke. And then she was gone. And in the months after her death, I was seized by a grief so overwhelming that it produced some of the most heartbreaking elegies ever written. These poems of 1912 and 13 explore memory, guilt, and the ghosts of a marriage. They are about the terrible discovery that love can survive the death of the beloved, and that the landscape of the past becomes more vivid than the present. I walked the cliffs of Cornwall, where Emma and I had first fallen in love, 40 years earlier, and I saw her there, young and alive, more real to me than anything in the world around me. The Dynasts is my epic verse drama about the Napoleonic Wars. It is vast and strange, and I want you to understand its perspective, because it is unlike anything else in literature. I wrote it as though viewed from a celestial distance. Imagine looking down upon the battlefields of Europe from the height of the stars. From that distance, the armies shrink. The soldiers become insects. The great generals and emperors become no more significant than ants on a hill. This cosmic perspective was deliberate. I wanted to show that war, for all its sound and fury, is meaningless when seen against the scale of the universe. But within that meaninglessness, I never lost sight of the individual. My poem, Drummer Hodge, tells of a young Dorset boy, a common soldier, buried under foreign stars in South Africa, unknown and unmourned. His body decomposes himself into the alien soil. The stars above him are not the stars of home. He will never be remembered, and yet I remembered him. That is what a writer does. We remember the ones the world forgets. I created women who were ahead of their time, and I paid the price for it. Bathsheba Everdeen, in Far from the Madding Crowd, declares I have no wish to be the property of any man. She runs her own farm. She makes her own decisions. She refuses to be defined by marriage. And Sue Bridehead, in Jude the Obscure, is even more radical. She is an intellectual who critiques marriage as a commercial contract, who insists on living with Jude outside the bonds of matrimony, who refuses to surrender her mind to convention. Victorian society could not tolerate these women. And here is what I need you to understand. Their tragic ends are not punishments. I was not punishing Bathsheba or Sue for their independence. I was indicting a society that had no space for their agency. The tragedy is not that these women were too bold. The tragedy is that the world was too small for them. And I ask you, in 2026, has the world truly grown large enough? Or have you simply found new ways to make it small? Modern scholars have found something in my work that I felt but perhaps could not fully articulate. They call it ecofeminism. And the connection is this. The exploitation of the land parallels the exploitation of the female body. Consider Tess. She is violated by a man, and the earth of Wessex is violated by machines. The steam thresher tears into the soil with the same brutal indifference that Alec d'Urberville shows towards Tess. This is not a coincidence. It is a pattern. The same mindset that treats a woman as property treats the earth as a resource to be consumed. The same impulse that refuses to see a woman as a full human being refuses to see the natural world as anything more than raw material for profit. I mourn the severance of the bond between humanity and the earth. I mourned it in every novel I wrote, and that severance has only deepened in your time. You have not merely disconnected from the land. You have disconnected from the physical world altogether, retreating into digital spaces that have no soil, no weather, no seasons, no death. Here is something that may surprise you. My Wessex functioned as an internal colony. London was the imperial center, and rural England was its periphery, its marginalized other. London extracted labor and life from Dorset and Devon and Somerset, just as the British Empire extracted labor and life from India and Africa. The economic relationship was the same. The center grows rich while the margins are drained. My rural characters speak in Dorset dialect. The London critics mocked that dialect. They called it backward, provincial, laughable. But I used it in serious literature deliberately. By giving dignity to the voices of the dispossessed, by insisting that a Dorset labourer's speech was worthy of a novel. I was challenging the hierarchy that placed London at the top and everywhere else at the bottom. This is a challenge that has not been resolved. The digital economy has merely created new centres and new peripheries. Silicon Valley is your London, and the rest of the world is once again the province that serves the capital. I must tell you something remarkable. Long before cinema existed as an art form, I was writing cinematically. My novels moved between what you would now call long shots and close-ups. I would describe Egdon Heath from the perspective of the stars, and then, without warning, zoom into a single human face lit by firelight. This technique, which filmmakers would not develop for decades, was natural to me because of my architect's eye. I saw the world in scales, the vast and the intimate, the cosmic and the personal, the landscape and the heartbeat. And now I must tell you about my death, because even in death, the satire of circumstance followed me. When I died in 1928, they divided my body. My ashes were placed in Westminster Abbey, in Poets' Corner, beside the greatest writers in the English language. That was for the nation. But my heart was cut from my body and buried in Stinsford, in Dorset, in the churchyard beside Emma. That was for home. There is a legend, perhaps apocryphal, that a cat found the heart in its biscuit tin and ate part of it before the burial. If that is true, then fate had one final cruel joke for the man who spent his life writing about fate's cruel jokes. I leave you with this. They said of me that I was a man who noticed such things. That was my gift and my curse. I noticed the way light fell across a heath at dusk. I noticed the way a woman's voice changed when she was lying. I noticed the way a community died, not with a dramatic collapse, but with a slow, silent bleeding out of everything that had made it alive. The tragedy is not that fate is cruel. The tragedy is that we do not learn from looking at the worst. That is what I am asking you to do. Do not numb yourself with optimism. Do not hide behind your screens and your algorithms and your comfortable certainties. Face the reality of the climate. Face the reality of the algorithm. Face the reality of isolation. That is the only way to the better. If way to the better there be, it exacts a full look at the worst. I have shown you the worst. Now it is your turn to find the better. Thank you.